Join our Patreon.
Do you really want to know? We are Mythvision.
Go ahead, ask your question, Chris.
Say, Dr. Price, what I was actually wanting to ask you about was basically the conditions under which the Jesus Project went under. Because Dr. Hoffman insinuated that there was a contingent of scholars that wanted to branch off into a mythicist study group in a way when he did his Bible and interpretation summary of what happened, basically. And that's also kind of what James Crossley then insinuated in his Jesus in the Age of Neoliberalism in 2012. So I was wondering what your take on it was.
Well, I remember we had a really interesting first meeting at the University of California, Davis, and I believe we had, I think John Dominic Crossan was there, Robert Eisenman, David, oh, good God, come on, the first edition of the New Testament. Oh my God, I can't believe it. Good thing you're asking me this now while I have any memory of it at all. Trobish, David Trobish. And, who else? I can't remember all of them. I didn't know all of them. April DeConnick was there. She gave a really impressive, I think that was the thing, because I was going to various atheist and humanist meetings back then. I think they were all at this thing. And then we had another one up in Amherst at the CFI headquarters with some of the same people. And there were a number of papers presented at both that I thought were very fascinating. Frank Zindler was there and did something was at one of these things. And he gave this paper about the need for real scientific methodology and the quest for the historical Jesus. And of course, he's a mythicist, and he figured there was still too much theology and faith involved in the thing, and that we ought to have some control over the methodology. Eisenman, what was he talking about? Boy, I forget now. But it wasn't any kind of wild, crazy thing. I talked about the idea that it wasn't all that long between Jesus' supposed life and the accumulation of the Gospels, that we have other examples of a rapid filling of the rain barrel with the Hadith of Muhammad and the infancy Gospel stories and so on. So that's not that odd. I have trouble remembering the rest of it, but I do have sort of an idea as to what happened to it. They shortly after this, and I know this because my wife Carol was doing the website for it, somebody gave us a list of supposed fellows of the Jesus Project, and it was not. It was a list of the people who had participated in the previous meeting. Well, we didn't ask for anybody to sign up, so nobody did, but they received some kind of mailing as if they had. And so people began to write in puzzled and indignant responses. Well, what are you, drafting me? I never signed up for this. And then we figured out what happened, and by then it was too late. It dissolved pretty much immediately after that point. And then there were mythicists involved, but it was not any kind of, as far as I knew, if there was some sort of mythicist underground, I'd have been part of it, I guess, but I don't remember hearing that at all. I suspect what they mean is that they couldn't tolerate the presence within the group of nuts that thought there was no historical Jesus. But I've never, I mean, I didn't hear that, though I knew most of them were not mythicists, but that's all I can think. But as far as I know, it dissolved simply because of somebody's stupid error of sending us this list of past attendees as if it were a membership list. That was the end of it, as far as I knew. If there was something else behind the scenes, I don't know. I'd like to read these things you mentioned. I'd never heard there was with Joe Hoffman. He is absolutely brilliant, but seems a little bit unstable sometimes. He seemed to be a mythicist, and then he was sort of ridiculing mythicism. Not that I care one way or the other, but I thought this seems kind of strange. Where is this guy at? So I don't know what's up, but I'd love to read any accounts of it you know of.
Yeah, there's a really interesting one by James Crosley and his book that he published in Routledge in 2012 called "Jesus in an Age of Neoliberalism," he had a chapter on it. It was pretty interesting, but I was really interested in other people's takes because his information was primarily based off of the statements of R. Joseph Hoffman.
Yeah, I wouldn't trust that. I love this guy. I think so highly of Hoffman, but there's a little weirdness there. I'm not sure I would trust him as an accurate source. I mean, you can see I have almost no memory of anything, even yesterday, so I'm no authority either, but I'm not sure I would buy that.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for your answer. I've been really curious about the project for a while, and lately I've been thinking there should be another Jesus symposium started sometime.
Well, what do you think of this? I campaigned within CFI for a while to revive it, and I wanted to have 3 recognized factions in it. I wanted to have conservative apologists, I wanted to have mainstream critical scholars, and then radicals like mythicists, and Paul didn't write the Dutch radical criticism thing. And I thought it would be interesting in every meeting to have one person from each group give a presentation and have responses by a person from each of the other groups, and then the next time do the same thing with the next group, having the main speaker and the others critiquing, responding. I cannot think of a better way to really get the issues out on the table and hashed out, but nobody seemed to want to do it. And but that would be good. What do you think of that? Would that be helpful?
I think that would be actually a really amazing thing to do, because it means that everyone has to bring their A game every time. Mm-hmm. And it also gives a really good range of opportunity, which I really let for scholars of various different walks to talk, and theological convictions to talk about as well, which I really like in comparison to some more recent work. Like Raphael Laddister recently published his monograph, and he explicitly states he wants to exclude Christians from the debate.
Ooh.
Yeah,
that's no good.
So I think that your idea of having 3 different factions come in and have to present a paper and then get critiqued by the other factions is just a really awesome way to do it, I think. It gives a range of responses and ideas.
Yeah, that'd be great. Somehow we gotta bring that into existence.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, the draft of my mythicist history book is on Academia EDU right now.
Okay, I think you sent me that also. I just have not been able to get to that and a bunch of other things recently.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I want to get through when I can because you're amazing on that stuff.
Yeah, I'm hoping. So far, I've gotten pretty good reviews on it. So I do have a section on there on the Jesus Project as well, and I'm mostly working from what Crosley and Hoffman stated, because there's been no other statements really from other members that much. So I've been poking around trying to figure out from other members what happened. So I reached out to Dr. Hoffman, but I never got a response, and I reached out to James McGrath, who I knew was involved in it. I'm going to be reaching out to Hector Avalos as well.
Yeah, he's terrific. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
When I email him, I always address him as "Oh, son of Priam," and he goes along with the gag. Yeah, he's terrific.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I guess I can't take anything seriously.
Yeah, I would really like there to be just another symposium, but one along those lines. I feel like the other symposiums were just really ideologically motivated. Like the Jesus seminar really had problems, in my opinion, and it excluded so many different viewpoints from the discussion at all. Like you talked about how they basically would just hand wave your ideas mostly, and so. I've been really wanting there to be like an actual symposium specifically devoted to the historicity of Jesus, because I think that would be one that really needs to happen. And there's not really been one that's happened in the history before. Usually it's just been a pretty polemical debate.
Yeah, they can be real interesting, but I'd rather have a little more objectivity and less, a little more light and less heat. With the Jesus seminar, there was always this instability right down the middle because they insisted that they were just interested in it historically, and I know a lot of them were, but there was always this talk about Christianity for the 21st century, and I said, well, wait a minute, I thought this was supposed to be just objective history, and as far as we can approximate that, but there was and sometimes you would hear a little strife between the people that said, yeah, we want to just stick with the history. It's not our affair what happens with Christianity. But most of the people I really knew are dead by now. It's been so long, I can't believe it. I haven't even been there for some years, but a lot of the people I remember as the most distinctive are just gone, including Bob Funk. And so I don't think I'd recognize anybody if I went back.
Yeah, I know someone that actually is still there, Emily Schaefer, and she occasionally goes to some of the meetings, but she says it's mostly actually being dominated by a lot of pretty sexist guys over there, so they don't even pay attention to the women, really.
Wow, I'm surprised at that gang that would be true, but she'd be in a position to know.
But the Jesus Seminar honestly really reminds me of like a symposium of liberal German theologians just trying to invent a new Christianity that they can compromise with history as much a lot of the time, but then they can't even agree on how to do that.
I once asked Karen King when we were talking about how the Jesus stuff doesn't necessarily have to be historically true to be inspiring, etc. Inspiring, and I said, well, would you approve the teaching of Afrocentrism, to say the Egyptians were sub-Saharan Africans and so on, just because that might empower some African Americans when it seems not to be factual? And I don't remember exactly what she said. It seemed to me kind of non-committal or evasive, but I think that there is this. I mean, Jesus turns out to be surprisingly liberal, and the approach to Paul, you get this sort of thing that, like from E.P. Sanders, that, Judaism at the time did not really teach salvation by works. But Paul did. I said, what are you trying to do here? You're making Paul a feminist and an ecumenist and so forth. I wonder if you're fooling anybody, and except themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and then there's the quite literal socialist idea of Jesus, where you had the Marxist scholars basically trying to turn him into a Soviet revolutionary for their cause.
Yeah.
Like Karl Kautsky and the Foundations of Christianity, and then you had Archibald Robertson and his socialist Jesus as well.
Oh yeah, that's all over Crossan and Horsley and people like that as I read them. And it's just, I mean, they happen to be, well, at least Horsley happens to be a community organizer. Gee, what a surprise that his version of Jesus is one as well. Like, has nobody learned anything since Albert Schweitzer? That Jesus just morphs into the likeness of the scholar that writes about him? It's dispiriting.
Yeah.
Sheesh.
Yeah, that's actually like one of my biggest criticisms. Like I've heard, since we actually last talked, I've become like really skeptical of what we can say about Jesus at all. Like, my biography of Jesus is like 4 bullet points of 10 words each, and I think that the whole quest of the historical Jesus is mostly just a projection of culture and what the scholars want out of him. Every scholar's going to have a different Jesus. Burton Mack, you have your cynic sage. If you go to Bart Ehrman, you have an apocalyptic preacher. Karl Kautsky, you have a socialist revolutionary. And then a similar thing then happens on the mythicist side of everything as well. You have a mythicist conception of the mythical Jesus, and there's a very similar problem there. It always turns into basically how best we can just turn him into the figure we want him to be instead of what we can justifiably say.
Yeah, and a version of that, or maybe another way of saying it, is that scholars tend to reduce Jesus to the categories they're using to study him. Like the greatest sinner in that regard, in my opinion, is Crossan. In his book about his big Jesus book, let's look at the anthropology of religion, let's look at the magic, let's look at the community organizer. He seems to assume that any perspective anybody has used to understand Jesus is all part of the puzzle, and that Jesus is simply a function of the means we use to study him. And he is like an incarnation of the methodology one prefers. And something you just said about the culture, it eventually became clear to me that what historical Jesus scholars are doing is what Derrida called the dangerous supplement. They've always said, okay, we've got institutional Orthodox Christology. That is a creation of culture, Hellenized Christianity, etc., etc. Let's go behind that to get to what originally happened. But how do you do that? Well, you do pretty much the same thing the 4th century theologians did. You pick out certain passages and develop a new Christology that you think and say is now the original truth, whereas it might be, but there's no way to know. And so what you've done is to, in the name of saying, I want to replace culture with nature, Jesus as he really happened, but in fact you're just replacing culture with counterculture, and masquerading as the real history, and you're just fooling yourself. And so I'm really very pessimistic about the whole thing.
I'm very much there as well. I think that basically what we have with the quest of the historical Jesus is just an exercise in, for basically us on the outside, it's basically just us looking at an exercise in how scholars can project as much as what they want onto historical data, or just construe what they think historical data is, so that they can fit something to their ideological agenda. It's always very interesting to me that every single conception of Jesus that ever it gets made up, whether it be a historical Jesus or a mythical one, is always usually fitting the scholar's agenda at that time.
Yeah. They're not, what is it? It's like so-called engaged scholarship. As Kierkegaard said, you're leaning too heavily on the saw. And it's not come out right. Jesus has to be this way because of my agenda. Oh, boy.
Yeah. Or the Gospels have to have X amount of historical data, or this has to be historical data because of the agenda, or on the converse, this can't be historical agenda or historical data because of the agenda. It's a criticism I have very much of, like, a lot of mythicists. I think that the statement that E.P. Thompson made back in the 60s, the amazing condescension of posterity. When we look at a historical source and we find any kind of minute way in order to discount it. Like, my criticism is that we can show all these parallels and reliances on the Old Testament or on mythological origins of the Gospels, but the problem is that methodologically, we still can't say they're not historical documents recording a historical person, because it could be that they're using the mythological elements to shape history. It could be that the historical figures were mimicking those documents on purpose. Could be that but then on the converse, it could also just be that the authors completely made it up. But we can't methodologically tell the difference between those three different hypotheses. So what we're left with is, instead of us being able to discount the historical evidence, is being left at like a historical agnosticism on their usefulness.
I agree, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. You spelled that out really well, because me and Dr. Price, as much as he says he doesn't think there may have been one, that's why when we did our show, I had to ask. I was like, are you throwing Dr. Price in the box of mythicism based on how you were defining it? Because I've heard him many times say, well, there definitely could have been this guy. I'm just not not convinced that, so that's interesting.
Yeah, I define mythicism on a logic level. I define it as the belief that it was most likely that Jesus did not exist. They assign a more positive value to it, the probability of his non-existence than his existence.
Now, you would gut says that, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, it seems to me the burden of proof is on the historicist, and I don't think they meet it, but I admit it's just the paradigm that I find makes the most sense. And I'm not the Pope or something. I mean, it's all such connect the dots, interpret it this way or that way. You just cannot dogmatize on this. There's some things we can, like, was there a Holocaust? Well, yeah, I know there was, because my father was present at the liberation of Dachau. But in the future, people won't have living memory. So that doesn't turn out to be really dubitable. But something from 2,000 years ago, come on, get real.
Yeah, exactly. And as you wrote in your the Jesus at the Vanishing Point in the Bileby and Eddie's edited volume, we can't know what happened in the past. We can only come to what we think is the most probabilistic answer.
Yeah.
And we have to assemble a gestalt of history.
Yeah, that's good.
So
Orthodox.
We simply can't be dogmatic about it, in my opinion.
No, as long as everybody agrees with me, I'm okay. You know what I mean? Dude, I love you, man. And look, it's obvious that we have a good energy here, and it's obvious we need to do another one of those hangouts on the channel where we can go into this because, for crying out loud, Bob, as much as you and him would probably disagree on there being a guy and your methodology would be different in your approach, you guys get along quite well, because I didn't know. I mean, you hear things from the internet, but you guys have turned out to be quite friendly, and he really likes you, Dr. Bob. And
vice versa. I have never breathed a critical word about Chris.
Hey,
or anything he says.
Make sure you pay me that money that I'm just kidding. Would you like to say bye to Dr. Bob before I close this out?
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Bob. I'd love to talk to you again soon, sometime. I'll make sure to email you a link to the full book. I think I only sent you a few chapters when they were finished.
Yeah,
but I'll send you a link. I'll send you a link to the book and as it stands right now. So it's about 121,000 words of the history of mythicism.
Wow.
So
what a contribution. Wow. Oh, I need your address, too. I was able to find 2 of these issues of the Journal of Higher Criticism. I have boxes of them that are mislabeled, and so a couple of them I couldn't find, but I do have a couple of them, and so I need your mail address.
Yeah, I'll send it to you as well.
Okay,
thank you so much for helping me with that.
Oh, no problem. Yeah.
Join our Patreon